Hello, everybody. Welcome to another IAPC&M CPD Business Building webinar. And this is the third webinar we've had the pleasure of Eric Maisel's company. So welcome, everybody. Welcome, Eric. Today, the subject is Kirism for coaches and how Kirism answers the toughest of life's questions. And it's a contemporary philosophy or philosophical approach to life created by Eric. And his book, Lighting the Way, which hopefully you got in the link that we sent out to you, is a powerful book that discusses purpose and meaning. Probably the biggest questions that we have as human beings. And so as coaches, we're helping our clients find purpose and meaning. So sit back, take plenty of notes and enjoy the next 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours, depending on how long we need, as Eric explains what life is all about and tries to answer this big question for us. So over to you, please, Eric.
What life's all about. Thank you, Dawn. Dawn has not heard this said out loud, which is why she's saying it the way she's saying it, but it's Kirism, at least that's the way I'm calling it. So Kirism is the thing we're talking about. Just a few practical things before I launch. There are 2 4-year-olds and a 7-year-old just above my head on the floor above. They may come bouncing in here. As you know, we're sequestered here. So if little children run by, I may be distracted. That happens. Thank you for joining me. As Dawn said, we'll go for as long as we go. If we have time, I would welcome questions. And I hope not to bore you. You know, we're talking about philosophical matters, which can get a little boring, but I hope it'll be exciting. Let me give you a little background before I start moving slides and starting the presentation. My name's Eric Maisel. I'm a retired family therapist, California licensed therapist, retired from that. I'm an active creativity coach. I work with creative performing artists all over the world. I started writing books about 50 years ago, and I've written about 50 or 60 books during that time, ranging over lots of subjects, fiction and nonfiction, life purpose, meaning, especially the creative life and the issues that creative folks face, from getting the work done to depression, to anxiety, to addiction, to all the things we know come up for smart, sensitive, creative folks. So I've been doing that for a very long time. When I was very young, and I would say as young as 5 or 6, I was already perplexed by, dismayed by what I saw going around me in the world. And I mean, at 5 or 6, I was already disconcerted by especially the religious emphasis of my neighborhood. I grew up in Brooklyn and was pretty roughly half Catholic and half Jewish. My mother was secular, so we didn't have to do any of that, but all of my friends had to go to Saturday school or Sunday school. And it all seemed then, still seems to me now, it all seemed then very authoritarian, lots of dogma, lots of unhappiness among the kids who were being bullied into needing to do things, believe things, act in certain ways. So even back then, I kind of knew without knowing what it was that I was going to have a penchant for existential things and existential literature and existential philosophy. And I started reading the existential probably when I was 9 or 10. Sartre, Camus, Kafka, Dostoevsky, those guys, not too many gals back then, those guys, Simone de Beauvoir. And I think one of my whole life projects has been updating existentialism, because if you know much about existentialism, you will know that all the existentialists stopped short of doing that thing which they all acknowledged was the next thing to do, which was to create a coherent philosophy, really to get from A to B to C to D, to not just have maxims about personal responsibility, but to have a whole plan, have a whole picture. So I think very early on, I always wanted to do that updating. I tried it many times. You know, what we need to know may not be available to us until it's available to us. So I tried doing this coherent, comprehensive thing as early as 25 or 30 years ago. In fact, I sold a book to Jeremy Tarcher, the publisher, called Lighting the Way, which is the same name of the book that I just put out, which was to do the work I now know how to do. 25 years ago, I couldn't do it. And so that book had to be canceled. I tried writing it, but I didn't know what I was saying yet. I didn't know how to talk about meaning and life purpose yet. So I've also wanted to redeem myself. That's why I've called this book Lighting the Way, because I always was disappointed that I couldn't say what I needed to say 25 years ago. This is all by way of saying this has been on my mind a long time. I've been working in this territory for a long time. And now I'd like to do a little presenting on where I've arrived. So this is the book that's just come out, Lighting the Way. It's available all over the world. Hope that what I'm talking about interests you and that you'll want to get your hands on it. So, thought we'd begin with a coach-client interaction, just a very typical interaction. And I can see, Dawn, is there a way I can actually get rid of the imagery because I can't see the right-hand side of my slides? Is there a way I can do that?
Yes, at the top where it says speaker, there's a little box with 3 little dots. If you press that, you'll be able to get rid of everybody's picture.
Where it says speaker.
So I've just taken everybody off mine and all I see now is you. So top button, it says gallery view, lots and lots of little boxes you can choose.
Oh, okay, I think that helps. There we go, thank you. Okay, back we go. Now I see where we're at. Okay, so we're beginning here with a coach-client interaction. So if you're working with a client, and these are typically clients I work with, who says that he wants to write a novel, and that he's been wanting to write a novel for years, but that he's blocked. Typically, a coach will ask a question like, a goal-orienting question like, what would you like to try this week to help get unblocked? And so these are the kinds of answers. Some of them are fanciful. You're not really going to get the first answer too often, but thought I'd present a variety of the kinds of answers that a coach might get. I think I'll spend the week praying on it. I'm too depressed to even think about writing. That's a very characteristic response nowadays. There's too much going on, another characteristic response. I intend to take a workshop. That's a characteristic response for a blocked writer, is to not write, but to take a workshop on writing. Maybe I'll journal on it, etc. Let me just give you a moment to be with these kinds of responses that we get. Including the last one, I have no idea. Handing it back to us, what do you suggest? Of course, some coaches won't suggest and some coaches will suggest. I'm in the camp of suggesting. I'm an active directive coach, but we know that there are 2 ways to look at that, either to return the question to the client immediately or not. So, now what? How do you reply? Essentially, the question I'm asking is, what does a coach do? What kinds of things do you say? And most importantly, why do you say what you say? And you'll see down here, I'm saying it can't be saying what you're saying just because you've read a text on coaching and it says, here's the thing to say. You don't want to be just following a script. That doesn't feel very authentic. So what you say should come, does come, but should come from what you believe. What you believe about life and what you believe helps. And so even if you're someone who always agrees with your client, because you think that that's both strategic and humane, you nevertheless will tend to append your own suggestion or thought next after you agree, which would look like, let me see if I can go backwards. Do I know how to go backwards? Okay. So let's say that your client says, I think I'll spend the week praying on it. I think what we tend to do is we say, great, that is, we agree, great, and I wonder. That is, we agree, we don't discount the person's own idea, and then we introduce something from our point of view, from our philosophy of life. I think that's the way coaches actually operate. They agree because they don't want to be discounting. Plus, clients get annoyed if you don't agree. So we agree, and then we come from our belief system. So, what do you believe? You understand what a big question that is. And most people can't get their head around the question, and so never sit down and try to answer it. Maybe they don't think answering is possible. Maybe they don't think that answering it is necessary. But so most people, if pressed, will come up with a slogan, some shorthand for what they believe. I just have a long list here of the kinds of things that if I pressed you, you might come up with as your answer to the question, what do you believe? And I think you can tell, looking at a list like this, that this can't do enough work for you. That coming to this kind of resolution to the question, what I believe, isn't enough of a resolution. It doesn't really help you understand how to make meaning, how to live your life purposes. It's a nice slogan that may be soothing and comforting, but doesn't quite do enough work personally. And why should you know? I want to just go through this list for a second to help underline why there's no particular reason why your clients or you should know what you believe. I'm sure you'll agree with me that children aren't taught a coherent philosophy of life. They may be taught rules, taught things to believe, told what to believe, but there's never been a parent, I can swear to this, I think, bet a nickel on this, who has sat his or her child down and said, here's what life's about from A to B to C to Z. What parent could do that? Nor, so let's say a parent can't do that, well, then it might be nicer than to say, since I can't really present a coherent philosophy of life to you, why don't you create one, John? Why don't you create one, Mary? We know that parents do not invite their children to do such a thing. They tell their children what to do. They don't invite them to come up with their own. Do you imagine inviting a 7-year-old or a 9-year-old or an 11-year-old to come up with their own philosophy of life and then live it? There isn't a parent who would think that's a great idea. They would be afraid they would be getting a vegetarian, save the world, some child they could not then handle. So children are not invited to do this, and they're not presented with it, nor are young adults. Some high school curricula are interesting and progressive and help young adults think about things, but there's no curricula out there that invites you to create your own coherent philosophy of life. Next, why should you believe something from beginning to end? Well, one reason you can't or don't is that all of the existing philosophies and religions are just too inconsistent and unsatisfying, I think. I think they're too inconsistent. Most of them have been developed by 73,000 different people, each with a slightly different idea or a major different idea. Just think of the tensions between Protestant denominations, where one denomination will say you're redeemed by work and another denomination will say you're redeemed by faith. That's an unbridgeable divide. That's a real difference of opinion. So what should a true Protestant believe? That can't be answered because it's too inconsistent. There are too many different kinds of answers. So I think people unconsciously throw up their hands and understand that they can't turn to some existing philosophy or religion for a consistent look at how they might want to live. The fifth one is a big one, and that is, it's my belief that cultural metaphors around meaning and life purpose are both wrong and unhelpful. What do I mean? I'm going to say this a few times over in different ways, but let me give you a beginning headline. We have been indoctrinated for the last several thousand years into a belief that there is a purpose to life, the purpose of life. Go seek the purpose of life. The same with meaning, that life has a meaning. Go find the meaning of life. So these headline slogans, these cultural metaphors have put both meaning and purpose out there somewhere. And you know that it's easy to spend a lifetime seeking. Going to India or reading this book or doing that thing or joining this religion or trying out this philosophy because you are looking, seeking, instead of what I think is appropriate, staying put and creating your own philosophy of life. And I'm going to make distinctions between life, purpose, and meaning in a moment, so I'm going to skip over that now. But just to repeat, I think what we have been taught, not just taught, but the way we speak about meaning and life purpose is unhelpful and doesn't allow us to talk about these important subjects with our clients very well. And I think we'll see shortly how there are interesting ways that you can begin to talk with clients about meaning and life purpose that you currently can't. The sixth is the same as the fifth, just that idea that we reduce big ideas and whole programs of living into too small maxim slogans and sound bites. Seven and eight, I think we understand that it's very hard to have real conversations about that, including internal conversations. And if two people try to talk about it, including two people who live together, that will often devolve into conflict. I have a book in Kirism called The Mystery Divide, which speaks to this tension between people who believe and people who don't believe, including that tension within oneself about should I believe or shouldn't I believe. And so that tension, that conflict raises our anxiety level. It makes it harder for us to focus on the task of creating a sustainable and sensible philosophy of life. Number 9, this is real work. Creating a philosophy of life or embracing a philosophy of life and living it is real work. And this is my bit of narcissism here. I don't think we've had a solid, coherent, contemporary life presented before. And I think that's a reason people are still looking, because they haven't found the one that makes sense to them all the way through. So why is this a problem? I think it should go without saying why not having a philosophy of life that works for you is a problem. But let me just go through some of the headline additional problems. If you don't have your own good reasons for proceeding in life, your own good ways of discussing with yourself how you matter and the extent to which you matter and what you're going to be doing and what your life purposes are, if you don't have that way of speaking to yourself and that vision for yourself, you're much more likely to grow sad. The reason I put depression in quotes is I'm in that camp that doesn't believe there is the thing called depression. I think that it's a label for things like despair and sadness, etc. That's a whole nother conversation. If you're interested in that subject, namely the current mental disorder paradigm and what's wrong with it, let me just suggest a couple of my books, The Future of Mental Health and Rethinking Depression, and maybe Humane Helping. Just off to the side, I'm going to use ordinary words like sadness and despair and not pseudo-medical words like depression as we chat together. So it's harder to deal with sadness if you don't have a solid philosophy of life that you yourself believe in. It's harder to deal with anxiety. If you are still trying to solve your meaning problems with substances or with behaviors, then you're much more inclined to be stuck with an addiction. A part of the energy of addiction is trying to solve our meaning issues and fleeing from our responsibilities and our freedom. Partly what addiction is, a flight from freedom. You're less likely to fly, less likely to abdicate that responsibility if that responsibility is underlined in your personal philosophy. It's much harder to get to the important things if you are not clear on what the important things are. That should go without saying, and yet it needs saying because, as you know, most of us are caught up with our to-do lists, just trying to get through the day with our responsibilities, etc. And we have a hard time, finding the psychic wherewithal to think through what are the important things and am I getting to them? If you don't have a solid apparatus for choosing, then it's harder to make choices in life. I think a philosophy of life helps you make choices. And by the way, life is one choice after another. When I work with creative and performing artists, that's among the first things I have to remind them of, is that the creative process is one choice after another. We spend our lives choosing. If you're a novelist, it's choosing whether to put the comma in or take the comma out, or send your character to Paris or send your character to Zanzibar. One choice after another. And choosing provokes anxiety. And the number one thing we do to avoid anxiety is to flee the encounter. So what that means is we try to not choose. We find choosing difficult because it provokes anxiety. Well, if you have a solid philosophy of life, that makes that choosing easier. I wish we could spend hours on just the next one, and that is the connection between a solid philosophy of life and how that helps you heal from childhood and adult trauma. Let me just say a thing or two here. Can't say the full thing. Let's say you cross a psychiatrist's threshold and enter into the world of the mental disorder paradigm, which is a pseudo-medical place. No real medicine is going on, but something that comes with a white coat and chemicals, looks like medicine. Well, the typical time a psychiatrist spends with a new patient is 15 minutes. So you can be sure that nothing's investigated, right? It has to be a checklist kind of thing. Psychiatrist has to go down a checklist and quickly get to a so-called diagnosis. That's a kind of philosophy of life. The mental disorder paradigm is a kind of philosophy of life that says circumstances and experiences don't matter. What the psychiatrist or other mental health professional is saying to you when he diagnoses is saying, something's broken, and it has nothing to do with you having a bullying father or a bullying sister or a bullying brother or a bullying mother. None of that's relevant to your experience of despair now, which of course wouldn't be called despair, be called clinical depression. None of that's relevant. We don't know what is relevant, but that surely isn't. And here's the pill. So I think you can see that if you had a philosophy of life that honored the importance of experience and circumstance, you would be much more likely to be able to chat with yourself about those painful things that happened and what you now want to do to heal. There is no place, no room for experience in the current mental disorder model. I just want to pause for a second because that's so odd and counter to what everyone on the call knows to be true. The next without a philosophy of life that announces that you matter, it's harder to believe that you matter. If the philosophy of life that you are attached to puts you as subservient to something else, to some set of principles, to gods, to something else, then you matter in relation to them, but not in relation to yourself. Even if off to the side you're granted some free will, essentially, you're not being granted that importance. If your philosophy of life and if what you're sharing with your client, if both of you are saying you matter, and saying it just like that, Chief Joseph, an American Indian, said, "The truth requires few words." After signing so many treaties that were never honored, he said, "I don't want long treaties, just say something true in a few words." Well, something true in a few words is you matter. Most philosophies and religions do not start from that place. They don't get there either, but they certainly don't start from that place. Similarly, if you don't have a good self-understanding of your obligation to get things done because you believe they ought to be done, then it's harder to be productive. I think all of us on this call want things to build our practice, to write our novel, whatever it is we want, or to be a certain kind of activist or to be of service. We want things, we want to be productive, and I think everybody on the call knows how easy it is to be not productive. Well, if your philosophy of life supports that productivity, then you're much more likely to actually get these things done. And the same with the last one, same idea. If you understand that it is up to you to realize your dreams and achieve your goals, of course, much is not in your control. Of course, much is about luck in life. But still, if your central energy is, I have dreams and I want them, and I want to realize them, and I have goals and I want to achieve them, if that's your basic energy, you're much more likely to realize your dreams and achieve your goals. So I'm arguing that a coherent, sensible philosophy of life can help in the following ways. A, and this is a super big deal, it should match your understanding of reality. You should believe your own philosophy. Its ideas should be sayable, should be able to say what the ideas are, and they should make sense to you. As I said previously, a sensible philosophy of life should assert that your experiences count and should assert that your circumstances count. It should have a way of talking sensibly about how to think better, how to, as the Buddha said, get a grip on your mind. And essentially, it should assert that you count. I know I've said this several times over already, this idea that you matter and that you count, but the reason that I'm saying it so many times is that we've come to this place, that's why Kirism is a contemporary philosophy of life, we've come to this place of half believing that we're only excited matter that the universe made because it could, that we don't really count, that we just got excited somehow, protons and electrons and neutrons and all of that, and that we come and we go and we don't amount to anything except passing matter. And so our philosophy of life has to deal with that felt belief that so many of us believe that we don't matter, that we are just, that we're not part of a universe with a purpose. Well, to say this simply, if we're not part of a universe with a purpose, but if we've been given an apparatus that allows us to conceive of something like purpose, then we better create our own purposes. That clearly must be our job in a universe without a purpose for us, is for us to create our own purposes. Some of these are repeats, but let me just repeat and underline. If you have a coherent philosophy of life that makes sense to you, that does reduce your experience of despair. It allows you to have conversations with yourself that you don't currently have, because right now you may not have the vocabulary to speak with yourself. Kirism has phrases like meaning investments and meaning opportunities and all kinds of vocabulary pieces that actually help you speak to yourself and also help you speak to clients. And we'll get to that in a bit. I think we've said 3 already. I think it's clear why 4 would be the case. Number 5, I just want to spend a moment on, and that is the answer to the question, what's your life about? And of course, there are all kinds of possible answers. I'd like to be happy. I'd like to be of service. I'd like this, I'd like that. I think what it comes down to when we get to our deepest level is that we want to make ourselves proud by our efforts. We want to feel like we lived the project of our life honorably. I think a word from the human potential movement comes up here, and that's the word authentic. I think what we're after is an authentic life. And I think that Kirism presents a picture of what an authentic life looks like. But I do think that's what we're after. And we don't have to chase happiness or chase this or chase that. None of that is really satisfying. Let me give you a parentheses here. And I know I'm going to go off on parentheses every once in a while, but if you're a novelist working on your novel, and let's say it takes you 2 years to work on your novel, if you're a novelist, you know that for those 700 days, for about 680 of those days, you've been pretty upset with your book. Because that's the genuine reality of processes, that it's difficult to write a novel, and on most days we're not happy with where we're at. So if you were hungering for happiness as what life's about, there's hardly a day in those 2 years you can be happy. And I want to pause there for effect. If you're out for happiness, you're not going to get what you're looking for on most days. But if you say to yourself, I mean to do what's important for me to do. One of my life purposes is to get this novel written, and I worked on it today, and I'm proud of my efforts. Then that day feels good. Well, it doesn't really feel good. It feels half good, as opposed to feeling all bad. If you're hungering for happiness, you might go out and have too many drinks after a day like that. But if you've made yourself proud, you can feel settled and calm in your understanding that you had a good day. This is a big deal difference between hungering for something like happiness and determining that what you're after is making yourself proud by your efforts. And last but not least, and that's the subject of this call, having such a philosophy that you can communicate with others provides you with some powerful tools to help you with your coaching, and we'll be getting there soon. So let me just bash some of the older philosophies and religions for one slide worth, and then we'll be through with bashing. I think one of the reasons we can't embrace older philosophies and religions is that they're internally contradictory. You have a punishing God and a loving God in the same being, et cetera, et cetera. We could spend days on the internal contradictions in every philosophy and religion. I think they tend to be intellectually unsatisfying. I think it's unsatisfying to imagine that there are gods who put 363 people in a plane for some particular reason to kill them all off at one moment, and a million other places of doubting the intellectual satisfaction of a given philosophy. We love narrative, and that's, I think, one of the reasons we get caught up in cosmology myths and creation stories. Something about them we love. I know with the grandkids, not only do they need stories from me all day long, they are creating stories all day long. And that's part of our repertoire. And so that makes us vulnerable to the storytelling narratives of religions and philosophies. That a philosophy or religion has a great cosmology myth doesn't mean that it's got the truth at all. Just means that it's a good job, it's done a good job of narrating something. Number 4, in Kirism, we believe that we need to decide what the next right thing to do is. It's a super complicated issue as to what the next right thing is. But what we know it isn't is to obey someone else or some other entity or something else. We know that that's not at the heart of ethics, is obedience. Too many, including even those philosophies that don't act as if they are demanding obedience, still feel pretty authoritarian in the living often. You get smacked with a stick for not sitting correctly by your Zen master, or etc. That there are right ways to be. And not only are there right ways to be, but if you are not doing things the right way, you're not being moral. And as I say, I think that's true of most philosophies and religions, is that there's either overt or covert connection between ethics and obedience. I've already said that. I don't think that a philosophy of life ought to start with a narration in the beginning. We don't know what the beginning was about. Kirism believes in genuine mystery, namely mystery without answers. I'd be the first to admit I have no idea what happened before the Big Bang. Hope you'll agree with me that you don't know what happened before the Big Bang. So we don't want to start with a creation myth because we don't know anything about creation. We want to start with our human experience, what we understand about life, what life has felt like to us, what we've experienced, etc. Most philosophies and religions, I would probably say all, but for here I'll say most, don't put you at the center. The first sentence of every religion and philosophy should be, you decide. And then whatever comes next, but that should be the first sentence. Or it could be a more complicated sentence. I'm about to say a lot of things, but basically, you decide. They also don't speak to our contemporary challenges, and the main contemporary challenge is the one that I mentioned before, and that's our deep-seated feeling that we don't matter. In the 19th century, in the 18th century, in the 19th century, and up to the mid-20th century, we got all excited about the possibility of the individual. We got individual rights, we got human rights, we got civil rights, we got all sorts of things were happening that made it seem like we were great. We are a great creature. We're going to be able to eradicate disease and get to the moon and back and populate Mars and etc. About for 250 years, we inflated the individual way beyond where the individual could reasonably be. Then in the 20th century, many things happened simultaneously. Science taught us much about the reality of life, that organic life could be made from non-organic materials. That was a big deal. We got things like the Holocaust and Hiroshima. And we could name a score of reasons which has produced the postmodern mind, which has produced the mind that can deconstruct anything and not believe in anything. We want to believe, but we have come to a place because of the 20th century, including especially, you may not know these folks, but the British philosophers of language of the early 20th century did a great job of explaining how language influences us. Think of Orwell, think of peace is war and war is peace, and how language influences us. To say this all in a shorter mouthful, we came to a place of simultaneously believing that we were amazing creatures and that we were nothing at all. In the past, I've called this the God bug syndrome, this simultaneous feeling that we are amazing. We got this thing, consciousness, how amazing. But any old virus could knock us right out. So we have been stuck for the last 75 years, since the mid-century, with this tension between believing in ourselves, in our value, in what we can do, and not believing that we count. I think 8 and 9 are just repetition, so let me pass on that. This is just the obverse or the reverse of what I just said, but let me just go through it. In Kirism, there's no purposeful universe. That's not the basic belief structure of Kirism, that the universe has reasons for us. Rather, we have to decide on our own reasons. We have to identify our life purposes and lead them, and we have to understand the nature of meaning, which I'll get to in a moment, but I'll give you a headline here. The nature of meaning as a psychological experience and as something that comes and goes. It's a super big headline, but let me give it its just due in a moment. Don't connect ethics with obedience in the sense that Kirism doesn't say do this, do that. It says you must decide what's right. And yes, then we're open to the objection, oh, doesn't that mean that people will choose evil? Well, they choose evil already. We're not giving them license. We're giving ourselves a self-obligation. We're giving ourselves the self-obligation, and our clients, I think. I think our clients want to hear this too. We're giving ourselves and our clients the obligation that they have to decide, we have to decide what's the right thing to do. I think I've said 3 already, 4 already. Let me see what's new here. Yeah, I think these are repeats, so let me move on. By the way, Dawn, I'm sure that folks can get the slideshow if they wanted. We'll figure that out. Is that correct?
Absolutely. The recording will be up next week, and they will obviously have the slides then on the blog.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I just want to, I'm obviously not going to go through this, but these are the 20 books that the book Lighting the Way contains. So let me say that more clearly. There is a book called Lighting the Way that just came out maybe a month or 2 ago that includes the current 20 books of Kirism. I'm not going to go through these a lot, but I just want you to get a sense of some of the headlines, and you'll understand what this philosophy of life is attempting to cover. Ideas like self-obligation and self-authorship, the difficult nature of the idea of individuality, and what happens when we try to live as an individual, and how that often will put us in conflict with society, and why that means we often have to live a life as a certain kind of activist because in order to be the individual we want to be, we're going to be put in conflict with the conservative nature of society and culture. Book 4 is an idea right out of existentialism that we are required to engage in absurd rebellion. What are we rebelling against? The very nature of the universe, and that's pretty absurd. What we're saying is the universe doesn't care, but I do. And isn't that absurd? Book 5 looks at the big difference between the idea of the purpose of life versus life purposes in the plural and life purpose choosing as an activity. It's going to be super helpful for you as a coach to have this idea available to you where you can talk to clients about having them identify their life purposes, choose which ones matter to them at this moment the most, prioritizing and ordering, rank ordering life purposes, and figuring out how to get to those life purposes in a daily and weekly way. All of that, we're going to get to that in a moment, but all of that is going to be very useful to you as a coach. Book 6 focuses on meaning, on the thing I just mentioned, and that is meaning as a psychological experience, not as an objective thing out there. Meaning is not like a lost wallet or a lost purse or something at the top of a mountain. It's a certain kind of feeling. It's a profound, important, and kind of odd feeling, but it's just a feeling. And as a feeling, it must come and go, like all feelings. You would not expect to feel joyous at all times or angry at all times, nor should you expect that meaning should exist within you as an experience at all times. This leads to a very simple, important idea, which we'll get to again, but let me mention it here. What that means is we can stop chasing meaning. We can reduce the importance of meaning in our life by finally understanding that it is just an experience. And we can say to ourselves, my life purposes are more important than experiences of meaning. I want to pause there to let that sentence sink in. And when you're working with a client, you would never say it in the way I'm about to say it. You would say it differently, but let me just say it one way. So you'd say, John, you're going to be starting a new suite of paintings this week. Interesting. I hope it goes well. But I want to tell you one thing that we've been talking about with respect to meaning, and that is you've decided that this is one of your life purposes to get these paintings done. And I know you're hoping for the experience of meaning while you're painting or from the painting, but you know, some of the things that are really important to us, like painting, don't deliver the experience of meaning as we're doing them. That is, you want clients to understand that they should persevere in living their life purposes, even if their life purpose isn't giving them the experience of meaning. Let me give you a simpler example. Let's say you're an activist in a political season, like now here in the States, and you've decided your job is to send out 150 emails a day in support of your candidate. So you do that. Email 1, email 2, email 3, email 4, email 5. I won't count all the way to 150. That may be super tedious, and you may get no experience of meaning from that 2 hours you spent sending out the emails. But if you have this philosophy of life undergirding you, then you understand that you've been living your life purposes and you've been doing things in the service of meaning, even though you didn't get the experience of meaning from doing it. This is such a big idea because there are so many things that we know we want to do, building a course, building up our coaching business, doing this, doing that. And we know that in the doing, we're not going to enjoy it. And somehow we've been trained to believe that that matters, that it matters that we don't enjoy it. It does not matter that we don't enjoy it. What matters is that we honorably live our life purposes. We have to, if we can, stop craving that experience. I know I'm spending a lot of time on meaning because you can tell I think it's important. Returning to our novelist, John, if that's his name. John may write his novel, may take him 2 years to write his novel, and the only real feeling of meaning he may get is 13 seconds when he's finished it. That's a lot of work for just half a minute of an experience. And yet, that's the reality of meaning. The whole time of writing it may have been sloggy work, but finally, there's a payoff, a super payoff in pride, in personal pride, and the feeling of meaning that comes with that personal pride. It's very hard to tell a client, well, you know, you're not going to get much of a payoff for the next 2 years, but then I promise you a payoff about 3.5 years from now. We don't say that to clients. But that is a piece of reality, is that we may not get the payoff as we're doing the thing. Book 6 discusses a big idea, and that is the way that many folks have inadvertently decided that life's a cheat. They've given life a thumbs down. It didn't happen all at once. They're not making that gesture all day long. They're not giving life a literal thumbs down, but they're disappointed on many levels. I think on the postmodern level of being disappointed that we're only excited matter, disappointed that a silly little microscopic bug can just knock us out, disappointed. So one of the simple ideas of Kirism is to give life a thumbs up. And again, I'm pausing because it's such a simple idea, but we may need to do that for ourselves, and our clients may need to do that for themselves. That is to literally make the gesture. Yeah, I'm for life. While I'm alive, I'm for life. As I say, you may not know that you've decided that life is a cheat, and your clients may not know that, but there's some bit of that going on in each of us, just because of what science has taught us about our passing nature. And because we have learned, we've had enough disappointments, whether it was not getting that red bicycle when we were 7, or not getting into that particular program, or not having a big enough client load, or whatever it is. We've had enough disappointments to be harboring the belief somewhere that we got cheated somehow. Book 8 is another one that we could spend a day on, and that is the idea in Kirism that there's lots to be learned from cognitive behavioral therapy, lots of good ideas, but there's another way to look at the mind that hasn't been looked at much, and that's the idea of the room that is your mind. That is the mind as a literal place you go to think, and the idea that the mind can be redesigned and redecorated. It's a very big idea that I'm only saying in a few words here. The idea that you can, for instance, install windows in your mind and let a breeze blow through, rather than having the claustrophobic feeling you now have when you visit your mind. Again, if we had time, we could do a whole redesign your mind session, because it's really the idea, it's essentially a certain kind of visualization where you visualize your mind, see what's in it now. For instance, for a lot of people, what's in there now is a bed of nails. Well, let's remove it and let's replace it with an easy chair. It's a certain kind of visualization that you can teach folks in 3 seconds. You can tell how fast I just said it to you. You can teach folks this fast that they can change their inner landscape. They can change what I'm calling their indwelling. This is a bigger deal than changing your language. This is not to disparage cognitive therapy at all, because I believe in changing cognitions also. But this is different from changing cognitions. This is changing the place from which the cognitions arise. I think this is super interesting. Talked about ethics and goodness already. We'll come back to it. I'm going to skip original personality because I'm going to talk about personality as a concept in a while. Let me just see where I want to go to. Book 12 speaks to really what I would call as a headline, the indignity of work. I'm calling it work, but it's really the extent to which those 40 to 60 hours we're obliged to spend paying the bills is a problem. Philosophies and religions don't come anywhere near speaking to this human reality, but we must. And obviously we must as coaches. If your client says, well, I'd like to get to my novel, to be sure my day job takes up 93 hours of my week, but I really do want to write my novel, we have to shake our heads and go, 93 hours a week? Oh my God. We've got to factor that in, don't we? We've got to get you a new job, or we've got to do this, or we've got to do that, or we've got to take work serious. As we work with ourselves and as we work with clients, we have to take the reality of work seriously. Number 13, this is another one that we could spend a day on, and that's looking at human energy, looking at chi, looking at the relationships among things like mania, productive obsessions, unproductive obsessions, ADHD, a million things that flow back to basic energy questions. If you're born with a lot of energy, bang, you're challenged. And I'm pausing because all of these kids getting their ADHD diagnoses because they have too much energy and they're bouncing off walls and they're completely bored in school and they're being medicated for having energy. We just don't talk sensibly among ourselves, with ourselves or among ourselves about what energy is and what energy regulation could look like. We don't talk sensibly about this, but I think you can have great conversations with clients about energy. Books 14 and 15 go together. They're kind of bookend ideas. And that's, to say it simply, it's not choosing between life being sorrowful or joyful, but understanding that both exist. Just having a balanced view, not saying life is suffering and not saying everything is smiley faced, but just having a mature understanding that life comes with both, sometimes more, sometimes the other. Book 16 looks at the idea of relationships and presents a model of how two people can best be together, live together, exist together. Book 17 looks at this question that I mentioned in passing a moment ago, and that's the inner tension between believing and not believing, and then the tension between people, between a person who believes and a person who doesn't believe. If I believe in Western medicine and you want to go to a shaman for your cancer, we've got a problem. I kind of have to let you go, but I am so upset because I don't believe in what you're doing, and vice versa. If you believe in alternate medicine and I'm trying to get you to go do chemo, we've got our problem that way, right? This is just the tip of a big, real iceberg. This is a reality in human lives that when people believe different things, they can love each other and want to support each other, but just be so upset that the other person is believing something which I believe not to be true. You believe something, I believe something. Belief here means we really believe it. I'm really believing what I'm believing. You're really believing what you're believing. And we're stuck there. That's why I'm calling it a divide. And it's hard to, there are ways to think about bridging that divide, but it's also possible that no bridge can bridge that divide. Book 18 talks about the tension between our humanistic impulses and our self-interest. And I think you can understand what some of those tensions will be and are, including in your clients. People don't come to us unless they have humanistic impulses. Those aren't the people who come to therapy or coaching or any of these helping. Those are people on the right side of things, typically. People on the wrong side of things don't want anybody to tell them anything. So the people coming to us are going to be secular humanists in part, and they're also going to be normal, selfish people. And so I think Kirism presents ways of speaking to that tension and helping folks, to say this simply, manifest their good angels. Book 19 talks to the idea of practice. There are no Kirist practices, that would be pushy, but it speaks to the idea of why practices are a good idea and why creating your own practices is a good idea. And I have a new book that's coming out this week called The Power of Daily Practice, which I think does a good job of explaining the elements of practice, varieties of practice, challenges to practice. To say that all simply, if you don't do things in a daily way, you probably won't get those things done. If you try to skip 2 or 3 days, we lose a year. If you're trying to write your novel and you let 4 days go by, it's going to be 3 months before you think about your novel again. It's why the daily of daily practice is a big deal idea. It sounds so ordinary. Oh, daily practice, sure. Good idea, no doubt. No doubt a good idea. It's different from a good idea. It's a really, really important idea because your clients are not going to get to the things they mean to get to unless they start instituting daily practices. And of course, that serves you as a coach to have that to invite them to do, right? Okay. The Analects of Kirism is just a summary book. You may know that the compilation of Confucian ideas is called the Analects of Confucius. So I just liked the word analect. Analect is, the definition of analect is a fragment of a philosophy. So the different fragments of Kirism are collected up in the last book. So that gives you a sense of what's in Lighting the Way. Now, I think we're probably going to get to coaching, I think. Let's see if we're getting to coaching. Ah, yes, okay. Lucky us. So here are 12 ways that you can use all of this as a coach, and then I'm going to do an individual slide on each of these. Let me just check time. Okay, we are doing well. Oh, okay. The first idea is, since there's no dogma associated with Kirism, and since I respect, not just respect, I demand that you figure things out for yourself, and since we have a strong belief in not knowing, that is, there's a ton of stuff we do not know, we honor and acknowledge that there's a ton of stuff we do not know, that makes coaching a certain kind of experimentation as opposed to something that experts do. I don't have an expert body of knowledge as if I were a real doctor or a real lawyer or a real electrician or a real plumber. What I have is space holding for us to run an experiment. So what does that sound like? What does the experiment sound like? John, you say you're not writing. What do you want to try this week to change that? And John says something. And then I say, let's try it. That's it. Now, that doesn't make for a full session, but that's in essence what's going on. John is telling us what the problem is or the challenge is. He's then identifying what he'd like to try. And the coach is saying, great, let's try it. Now, of course, you can add bells and whistles like, why don't you check in with me each day to see how it's going, or this, that, and the other thing. You can add all kinds of bells and whistles. But the basic idea is we don't know what to do. We're just trying things. Number two, I think I'll just go through this fast because each of these has an individual slide. So let me go through these fast. Kirism gives us a way as a coach to talk about life purpose, about meaning, about daily practice, about goals, which is so important to coaches, to have good ways of talking about goals. It provides a really smart, simple way to talk about personality. Yes, we are not therapists, but everybody who is in a helping profession like coaches needs to have some way to think about personality, to think about change, to think about what works with respect to upgrading personality. We have useful ways to talk about mind, circumstances. Okay, you get the idea. So let me go through individual slides on each of these. So number one, and this is a big deal because so many coaches are worried about not knowing this or that, right? Not having sufficient expertise, not knowing what to do if a client says X, Y, or Z. Instead of thinking of yourself as a certain kind of expert, think of yourself as a certain kind of scientist. Scientists don't know nothing. You don't know nothing. There's lots of stuff you know, but that doesn't mean you know what's causing X in this person or what will help X. That you don't know. Each session is its own experiment, and each session provides the client with a sense of power, the power to be thinking about what to try, and the sense that he or she is going to get to do something actively this week. Because we are easy with not knowing, we can say that out loud. I don't know. Joe, I have no idea if this is going to work, but it sounds really interesting. Let's give it a shot. Joe, I have no idea if this is going to work, but let's give it a shot. As with experiments, maybe your hypothesis is X and you've run experiments and that doesn't seem to be true. You change your hypothesis. We get to change our hypothesis. So let's say, let me flesh this out a little bit. Let's say you're working with Joe on the symphony he's writing. And he's been saying that it's the second movement that's giving him the most trouble, and that in order to work on the second movement, he needs to listen to a little Tchaikovsky this week. You can tell I'm being fanciful. And so Joe does that. He listens to a little Tchaikovsky this week, and he still can't work on the second movement. He comes back in and says, didn't work. So to be fancy about it, we change the hypothesis. That's a fancy way of saying, let's try something else. Joe, I guess it wasn't about needing to listen to Tchaikovsky, huh? What else could it be about? Well, it could be about the fact that my 7 kids are at home, running around the house. It could be about that. Oh, Joe, it could be about that. So changing the hypothesis is just a fancy way of saying we don't get attached to the thing we're trying. Like, oh, this is sure to be the answer. We never act like it's sure to be the answer. It's just that we're running an experiment. And if it doesn't work, and often we give the experiment some time, like we might say in a given session, maybe listening to the 1812 overture wasn't the right Tchaikovsky. Why don't you try the violin concerto this week? Maybe that's what you had in mind. In other words, we play the same experiment out a little while longer, perhaps. And this is a coach's intuition as to whether to continue the experiment, or we ask the client, you think we're still on track? Should we give this another week? Maybe fiddle with it a little bit, maybe massage the activity a little bit, but stay with it. And the client will say yes. Clients have good intuitions about this. Client will say, I don't think it's about Tchaikovsky, it's about something else. Or the client will say, I think you're right. I think I just listened to the wrong piece. Let me give it another week. And I think you can tell I'm on number 4 here. I see they're not numbered, but I'm on number 4 now. I think you can tell how we're not just talking about things. We are very much focused on doing things. This isn't that brand of therapy where the client gets to speak about his childhood for the whole session, and then at the very last minute we say, time's up. That's not what we do. We're helping the client articulate what he or she wants to get done next. By the way, and this is a parenthesis that we'll get to in a moment, but this is a good moment to say it. Not only are we asking clients to articulate what they want to get done, I find it very valuable to ask them to align their thoughts with their behaviors, namely, to tell me what they're going to be thinking that supports the action they're intending to take. I think this is very, very sound and strong work to do with a client. So if the client, I don't want to use my Tchaikovsky example anymore because I'm finding it too hard to say Tchaikovsky. Let's see. Let's say that your client is a yoga teacher and wants to spend 20 hours this week building her yoga practice. Let's say that's your client's goal. So I would say to a client, okay, so what do you want to be thinking during the week that aligns with that goal? And the client will say, I'm not really sure. And then if this is a new client, I'll have a conversation about thinking thoughts that serve, and we'll get to that in a moment. But the upshot is, in no time at all, the client will come up with one or two things that she can put up in big letters all over the house. And I'm big on doing things like that. Tactical things like, let's say she decides that to encapsulate her intention for the week, she's going to put up the sign 20 hours. That's the thought that's going to align with the intention of working on her yoga practice for 20 hours. Just the simple 20 hours. I would have her make 7 signs that say 20 hours and put them up all over the house. Because clients need that kind of self-support and reminder, or else they'd be doing it on their own, wouldn't they? We're trying to add on to what they already know to do. We're trying to offer them something, and things like that, having them come up with ideas that connect to their intention, and then having ways of putting those thoughts up somehow or underlining those thoughts for themselves really helps. And number 5 is what we've just said, co-creating experiments. And this is why I see coaching as so beautiful in its own way. There's always another hypothesis to test, and there's always another experiment to run. That's really the case. We're inventive, your client is inventive. We're not going to run out of things to try. Unless you both throw up your hands. And coaches don't typically do that, throw up their hands, but they can fall into the trap of throwing up their hands if the client says something like, I'm just too depressed to do the next thing. A coach can easily not know what to do there. But because there's always another experiment to run, another hypothesis to test, the coach can say, wow, so maybe we better focus on this. You're calling it depression, maybe it's sadness or despair. Let's focus on this next and see what we can do about it this week. If it's the thing that's most important, the sadness, let's focus on it. I've changed the hypothesis, and now we're going to run a new experiment now around the sadness. And the client is going to feel heard. If I try to say, oh, let's try writing your novel one more time, client's going to say, didn't you hear me just say I'm too depressed to do that? And you're going to have to say, oh, sorry, I didn't quite hear you when you said that. But if you do hear the client, then you can say, okay, then this is the thing that's now front and center. This depression is now front and center. By the way, I hope you all believe that as coaches, you can deal in common sense ways with things like sadness and anxiety and what have you, human things, and don't just have to refer out all the time. This is its own big subject and I don't really want to say a thing too simply here, but I do hope that you have permission to deal with things like sadness and not just say, well, why don't you deal with your depression with your therapist, and then once you've handled that, come back and we'll work on your novel again. I don't like that way of operating. I don't think that honors what we can do for a client. I think we can say to a client, okay, let's look at the sadness now. Okay, we are back to life purposes. I don't want to bore you by saying the same thing too many times, but let me go back over it. You can first present a picture of life purposes versus life purpose to clients. First, you would want to get a good sense of it for yourself. But let's say you get it. Let's say you get this distinction between the purpose of life versus multiple life purposes, and that our task is to choose our life purposes, don the mantle of meaning maker, put those life purposes on our own back. And then what follows is the idea of actually getting to them. It's one thing to have a nice menu or list of life purposes sitting off somewhere in the next room, but you want to have your methods of getting to them each day. I think a life purpose check-in is a great idea for clients and for you. That is, you start each day just for a minute with your list of life purposes, and you say to yourself, which of these can I get to for a bit today? Let's make up a list so you get a better sense of what I'm saying. Let's say on your list of life purposes is creativity, working on your novel, activism, fighting for your candidate, relationships, maybe having a hard conversation with your son about his drinking, etc. Maybe there are five, maybe health, maybe some combination of exercise and diet and this, that, and the other thing. So let me just keep it to 4 because I'm not sure I can even remember 4. But let's say that the 4 are creativity and relationship and activism and health. Let's say that those are the 4 things you want to keep an eye on. You've made the determination that those are 4 life purposes, or to say it more simply, 4 important things. Well, now each day you think about those 4 things. Just for a brief moment, and you say to yourself, novel, do I have a place for that? If you have a daily practice, you do. You'll turn to your novel automatically. Activism, oh boy, I'm so down about the world. I don't know if I can get to it today, but I will. Relationships. My son's drinking is worrying me more and more. And I think today, oh my God, I think today I'm going to have that conversation. And then you look at health and you say, I'm going to skip exercising today because I want to write a script for myself so that I know what I'm going to say to my son. So you can see each day becomes a negotiation around your life purposes, as opposed to just being pulled about by the nose by your to-do list. This is a huge change in the way a life is lived. I'm just looking at this list to see if there's anything to add to what I just said. I think this list, I think I just explained everything on this list except the last 2. Our life purposes change. They change over time, and they change because our opinions change, and they change because our circumstances change. Let's say that it's very important to us that we stay healthy. And then our daughter comes to us and says she needs one of our kidneys. Do we have 2 kidneys? Forgive me if we only have 1 kidney. I don't want to make a medical mistake here. She has some disease and she needs one of our kidneys. Suddenly, our health is secondary to saving her life. Our life purpose list just shifted. You get that, right? You get how that shifted. Our health We were honest when we said our health was important. We're still honest about that, but now we're going to risk some amount of health to undergo surgery to give our daughter a kidney. That's how life is. Life shifts, and the importance of things shift. It's why I think we can suggest it to clients, but we want it for ourselves. We want a regular life purpose check-in, maybe once a month, where we just ask ourselves the basic question, are my important things in the same order, and are they still important? What if your career had seemed so important and then suddenly your career vanishes for some technological reason, some technological event? You were a shoemaker and now there are no more shoemakers or something. Obviously you've got to check in with you. Obviously, the things that are important to you just shifted dramatically. That kind of shift, you don't need to have a formal check-in on. It's going to slap you in the face. But some other kinds of shifts and changes may be more subtle. Let me give you an example of a subtle one. Let's say that you're a writer and you're 2/3 of the way done on one novel, but you have a new idea that's really pressing and wants to be worked on. It's a very typical situation for a creative person. You're working on X, but Y seems interesting. It's kind of a grass is greener thing sometimes. The X is sloggy and Y looks really bright and shiny. Well, if you have this once a month life purpose check-in, you can ask yourself then, and you have to tolerate a difficult thought here because it's going to make you anxious. Should I continue working on book A, which is getting close to the end, or do I have permission to work on book B, which is so exciting to me? You don't have this conversation every day. If you have this conversation every day, that's debilitating, and you won't work on A or B. But if you know that you have a regular check-in time, let's say once a month, where you get to have this kind of conversation with yourself, then you can commit to A or B for a length of time, and then come back to deciding about A or B once in a while. Hope that was clear. I went through it a little quickly, but I hope that was clear. Okay, so let me just repeat the headline. We have gotten suckered into the idea that there is a purpose to life when there isn't. There really just are the life purposes that we decide are important. That's the big headline. The same with meaning. There is no meaning to life, as if there's some handwriting on a rock somewhere that only we were to encounter it, we would then know the meaning of life. Nope. For some reason, we have been granted, it may just be an artifact of consciousness. Who knows why some things feel meaningful and other things don't, or why the same thing feels meaningful one day and not the next. You've all had the experience of watching a movie and you're engrossed in it and something about it feeling meaningful. And then your mind switches and you say to yourself, why am I watching this? The meaning just vanishes. Some inner calculation happened where suddenly you don't believe in the premise of the movie or something went on and the meaning drained right out of your experience. The movie didn't change. The movie was exactly the same movie while it was feeling meaningful and while it was not feeling meaningful. So once you get this big idea that meaning is just a certain kind of experience, like joy or hatred or this or that, then all the rest follows. Meaning is bound to come and go. There are going to be times, even long stretches, where life is not feeling meaningful. Just like there may be long stretches when life is not feeling joyous. That has to be okay. You don't want to make that into a tragedy or into a quest. Oh my God, meaning went somewhere. I better rush out and do X. You can relax with the fact that meaning went away for a while. At the same time, what this means, and this is a big affirmative bit of Kirism, it means that meaning is a wellspring and a renewable resource. It's going to keep coming back, and we can coax it back. There are things we can do to increase our experiences of meaning. Some of those things are, on the next line, we can make meaning investments. By that I mean, we can decide to invest our human capital in one or another of our life purposes. So to say this slightly differently, what's going on here is the idea that if we live our life purposes, we're bound to experience that activity as meaningful some of the time. It just follows that if we believe it's meaningful to play with our child, not every single time we play with our child are we going to have the experience of meaning. Sometimes we're going to be distracted and blah, blah, blah. But many times we're going to have the experience of meaning. By the way, if you want your best understanding of the thing that I'm saying here, just make a list for yourself of the things you have actually experienced as meaningful in life. It's going to be an odd list. Your whole PhD program may not be on that list. That maybe did not feel meaningful at all. But having certain conversations with your Aunt Anne about family history, that maybe felt as meaningful as anything you've ever done. It's going to be an odd list. An unexpected list. Things you would have expected are the things that were meaningful to you may not have been, and vice versa. But this list is invaluable because it gives you a sense of what you might try in the future to coax the experience of meaning into existence. If having conversations with Aunt Anne were experienced as meaningful and she's still alive and you can still have those conversations, have one. That may have completely slipped off your to-do list, completely slipped off your radar, but now that you see that it's on your meaningful experience list, then you know to go try it. Conversely, you probably know not to get another PhD. So that's meaning investments, that you invest your human capital in X in the belief that that may prove meaningful. But you also create meaning opportunities. That is, you try things without the expectation that it will be meaningful. Just some off-the-wall thing, just to see if it's a meaning opportunity. I'm going to make up a completely fanciful one. You go out in your backyard and you move rocks around. There's probably a 96% chance that that's not going to be experienced as meaningful. But you know, who knows? It's an opportunity for meaning to come up within you. Trying things that are new, trying things which you kind of have an intuition or a suspicion might prove meaningful, but maybe they're a little risky or a little odd, or that you censor perhaps for some reason. These are now things to try, because if you want the experience of meaning more than you now have it, you need to do both of those things, make meaning investments and create meaning opportunities. And parenthetically, I think you can see how this language can be useful in coaching, how you can help people have a new vision of or understanding of meaning and why they're trying. So the two of you suggest something for the coming week. Well, now it's not just an ordinary suggestion. Now it's got two pillars under it. It's got the pillar of life purpose and it's got the pillar of meaning opportunity. You're shoring up, buttressing up the reasons for doing the things that you and your client are co-creating. It provides motivation for clients already 2/3 motivated to do X, but not 100% motivated. You know that. Clients are not 100% motivated to do the things they say they want to do. This adds percentages of motivation to remind them that they may get the experience of meaning from this and that they will be living their life purposes by doing this. Okay. Just checking time. Okay, we're moving along, so I've got to move along. Okay. I'm going to go slightly more quickly because we've got a number of slides to get through. The combined idea of understanding what a day looks like, to use my language, negotiating each day, and the idea of daily practice, including daily practices, is a very rich way to live. It helps you better understand what the next right thing is, so that you don't just mindlessly turn on the TV or check email one more time or play a computer game or something, but you know what your day looks like. Now, this can sound too regimented, too boring, too routine, too something that as a 17-year-old we would never tolerate. But now as an adult, I think we can talk ourselves into the understanding of this is the right way to live, because A, it produces the most meaning, B, it gives ourselves the best chance to live our life purposes, and C, it makes ourselves proud. At the end of the day, whatever we do to celebrate that day, we've earned that day. We've earned that celebration. We may be exhausted, but we understand why we got ourselves exhausted. I think I've said this already, but let me just rush through it. And that is, we set goals as coaches. I think that that's our primary task or method, is to help our clients articulate what they want to get done, and then co-create with them the ways to help them get those things done. And so what I'm saying here is that the basic ideas of Kirism help support goal setting and goal monitoring by virtue of the ways we talk about life purpose choosing and doing the next right thing. And also about upgrading personality, which I think we'll get to in a moment. So let me see if that's the next one. Yeah, good. Okay. So we haven't talked about personality yet. I want to spend a moment or two or three on this Kirist idea. So in Kirism, there's a simple three-part picture of personality. Simple to say, and I think true to life. And that is that personality is made up of original personality, that is who we are when we come into the world already. Formed personality, who we become over time, sort of the hard, accreted self, the stiff self that we become over time. And then what I call available personality, our remaining freedom to do what we want to do and be who we want to be. All three of these are important concepts: original personality, formed personality, and available personality. And they let you do lots of work in coaching, because you get to say things like, you would not say it in this language, you would find your way of saying it, but let me just use this language now for teaching purposes. You could say, this thing you call depression, what if you were born sad? Or what if you were born smart and sensitive, and those sensitivities and smartness kind of guaranteed you some sadness? Do you think that we have to look at this as a mental disorder or as a lifelong challenge around sadness? That's such a different way of talking than diagnosing and treating a mental disorder, but it's also the truth. What if a person has come into the world with some lifelong challenge? That's not a mental disorder, that's a lifelong challenge. And then we get to say, and over time, you're going to have your repetitive ways of doing things. That's your formed personality. We do things in a repetitive way so we don't have to rethink things all the time. But our formed personality, with all of its strengths, will have its shadow side too. And so what I'd like us to think about is how you can make use of your available personality to upgrade your personality, to reclaim territory from your formed personality and be freer. And as I say, you probably wouldn't talk to a client this way, but if you have this model in your mind about your client's remaining freedom and how he or she can get more freedom by reclaiming territory from formed personality. Let me give you a simple analogy. If your client is currently an addict, he only has so much available personality, a limited amount. If he's running around all day looking for a fix, he does not have much freedom to do other things. But the second he enters recovery, he has more available personality. Something has shifted there. It doesn't mean that's going to remain there for all time. We know about slips and slides and all of that. But something changed there. And this model helps us understand what changed there. I use this language around upgrading personality all the time. Clients get it. They will select what they want to do. It might be more passionate or take bigger risks or whatever it is, speak up, be more confident. I don't have to provide a list of I don't have to say what sort of personality upgrades do you want to try from this list. All I have to say is, what would you like to upgrade? And folks know what that is. They'll usually come up with a list of their own 2, 3, 4 things. And then as a coach, what we have to do, we have to help them prioritize so that they're actually working on something, not thinking about working on everything, but actually working on something. So I think this upgrading personality, even if you don't think you're doing personality work, you are doing change work. You do want your clients to change in the direction of getting things done. And this is a model that helps you speak about and think about how change occurs. First, it reminds you that clients are stuck. Form personality is sticky. Clients, human beings, are stuck, but they have some available personality remaining, or they would not be there. Unless they're court referred, they would not be there. They're there because they have enough freedom to have gotten them to you. And so you can say it that way. Yeah, you've been having this problem for a long time. You're quite stuck, but you got here. I'm sure you've got some available personality remaining, and we're going to make use of it starting this week, etc. I think we should all be working cognitively with clients. This is not about doing therapy. This is just that it's important that folks think thoughts that serve them. They won't get their work done if they aren't thinking thoughts that serve them. If all of their thoughts distract them or demoralize them or what have you, they're not going to get their work done. So the two ideas that I like to provide to clients or sell clients on is the idea of thinking a thought that serves you, and that's a different idea from true or false thoughts. This is a big deal idea. Let me give you a quick example to flesh this out. Let's say you're a writer and you go into a bookstore during a time when you're allowed out in the world. And you see all the books there and you hear yourself say, wow, there are a lot of writers out there. That's a true thought. That is not going to serve you to be thinking. So one can't dispute the veracity of the thought. You wouldn't want to say, no, that's not true. Of course that's true. What you would be saying is, no, that thought does not serve me. So the 3-step process that I teach pretty much all clients is first to hear what they're actually saying to themselves. Because many of the things that we say to ourselves in the service of self-sabotaging ourselves is tricky language. Nowadays, the things that folks say the most often to make sure they don't achieve their goals is, I'm too tired and I'm too busy. And because there's so much truth to both of those utterances, they let themselves off the hook. We as coaches have to help them append a big but there. Yeah, I'm tired, but I can get to my novel for 20 minutes. Yeah, I am super busy, but I can get to building my coaching practice for half an hour. So A, they have to hear what they're saying. And sometimes I teach them an exercise in just tolerating a difficult thought for 10 seconds. If a thought is really difficult, let's say in the back of your mind, you know you need a divorce and you've known it for 7 years. You know that you're not thinking that thought in a way that you can actually hear it. You're thinking it and you're feeling it and it's circulating in your system, but you're not hearing it in a clear way, like, I need a divorce. That's the kind of difficult thought I'm talking about here. And so I help clients through an exercise where they can tolerate the thought for 10 full seconds. 10 seconds is a long time if you're trying to think a thought like I need a divorce. If you could actually think that thought for the full 10 seconds, you're probably going to get the divorce at the end of those 10 seconds. That's how powerful it is to think a thought that long. But that's all by way of saying that there's this model, simple model of hear the thought, dispute it on the level of whether it serves you or not, and then have a global affirmation that keeps your mind on track, like I'm perfectly fine, or back to the novel, or do the next right thing, or whatever it is for you. That three-step model can be taught to any client. Hear what you're thinking, dispute the thoughts that don't serve you, and affirm something positive that keeps you in the right direction. I find that providing that one idea of thinking thoughts that serve you really helps clients generally. Then the second idea, which I talked about earlier, is that there's not just the thoughts we think, but there is the source of those thoughts. There is the mind percolating those thoughts up. And I think we actually experience that mind as a place we go. I think many of us experience it as a closed, rather claustrophobic, windowless place. And it's been that way probably since childhood, when maybe the parents were yelling outside, so we had to close up our mind, stay inside of it in that airless place so we wouldn't hear, etc. So I invite folks to visualize that room, and I make suggestions about what they might see there, like they might see a bed of nails there, which they might want to get rid of. Or they might notice that the walls are very drab, and they might want to give the walls a new coat of paint. Or they might notice that the room has no windows, and that they could install windows that look out on the beach or the moon, etc. And this simple idea of envisioning your mind and visualizing changes can make a big difference. I have a whole book on this called Redesign Your Mind, coming out next year. It isn't out quite yet, but just wait around till next year and it'll exist. As I mentioned in the outset, working therapists, of course, care about experiences and circumstances, but insofar as they're supposed to diagnose and treat mental disorders, it's not in their mandate. It's not in their mandate to think about experiences and circumstances. What they're supposed to be doing is going down a checklist of symptoms, checklist to be found in the DSM-5, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association. They're supposed to open their Bible, go down the checklist, give you a diagnosis, and then somehow connect that diagnosis to a treatment plan, even though the DSM is silent on treatment and also silent on causes. But by mandate, that's what they're supposed to do. Now, real therapists don't do that. They care about your experiences and circumstances. But by mandate and license, that's what they're supposed to be doing. Well, as coaches, we don't have any of that mandate and license. We're not stuck needing to think about mental disorders. We can absolutely honor that a person's experiences and circumstances matter. And so, with respect to any goal that we set up with the client, we can ask simple questions, not said this way. This is just said in a teaching mode here, but we can essentially ask the question, what in your current circumstances is going to get in the way? And what in your past experiences are going to get in the way? We're not asking for a full history. We're not asking them to give us a detailed floor plan of their house. We're giving them the offer to think about two things. What in their past is making this difficult, and what's going on right now that's making this difficult? So this philosophy of life, unlike many philosophies of life which have nothing to say about experiences and circumstances, this philosophy of life actively invites coaches, human beings, to think about the extent to which their experiences matter and the extent to which their circumstances matter. So there are a couple of abiding tensions that go on in human beings and between human beings. And this is one of the big ones. That is, we have a whole litany of things that we believe to be true about how we would like the universe to be: fairer, more just, more compassionate, etc. And those inform our life purpose choices. That's the person we want to be, and that's the world we want to have. Comma. And we also want the steak sandwich, and we also want to watch TV, and we also want accolades, and we also have self-interest verging on selfishness, verging on narcissism, verging on etc. Both things are true. There's no saint. There's no saint. And so with respect to ourselves, we have to figure out this dynamism, this tension for ourselves, and we have to have permission to be self-interested. It's built into us. We have to have permission to be self-interested. If we keep track of that essential Kirist ethical phrase, do the next right thing, if you make use of that phrase, then the next right thing might be something in support of humanity, but it might be taking a nap, or it might be having a steak sandwich. I don't want to keep saying steak sandwich because I may offend the 73% of you who are vegetarians. So let's say an avocado and broccoli sandwich. If that's the next right thing, then that's the next right thing. The next right thing does not have to just be the next thing in support of humanity. It can be a thing of ease. If you just spent 2 hours working on your novel, you can watch an episode of The West Wing or something. That's the next right thing, quite possibly, for you. That may reinvigorate you and help you do yet the next right thing, which might be some political activism thing. So that's a long-winded way of saying two things go on inside of us. We have this impulse to save the world and put the world on our shoulders. And we have self-interested impulses also. There isn't an answer to this dilemma, but it's something that we as Kirists think about, understand that it's a tension, and understand that it's a tension in clients. We don't have to be disappointed if a client did X amount of what he said he would do, but then fell off the wagon Y% out of self-interest. We applaud the X%. If there is no X%, maybe we can't give him a full-bodied round of applause. If he's doing nothing in the service of his own ethical nature, well, then it's hard to give full-throated applause. But if what is more likely is that a person gets something done with respect to his or her goals, but doesn't quite get enough done, we come from this place right here. We celebrate what does get done, and we are compassionate about the part that hasn't got done. We respect the deep selfishness of genes. Doesn't mean that we want to give in to them, and we refuse to let our clients give in to them, but they have their place. And then the second or next tension is the tension between, let's call them good angels and bad angels. Oh, no. Let me skip to the next one. No, let me go back. How do you go back? Okay. I thought the next tension was coming up, but now we're back to the thing that I mentioned is such a difficulty for most human beings, the reality of work. Since we don't have a lot of time, I think I want to just say one thing with this and invite you to go find out more about it in Lighting the Way. The headline I want to say is the following. I did a big interview series around meaning with some interesting folks who knew a lot about meaning, and the following came up for each of them. A point in their life came up where the meaning had completely drained out of the work they were doing and out of really their belief system around that work. They knew that they were done with that work, but here's the interesting part. It took them a full 5 years to make a change. Why? For all the obvious reasons: giving up a paycheck, in one case, giving up tenure, in another case, giving up your religious order. Big things that don't come easily to change. So I think one thing we can think about and one thing we can offer clients is the following simple phrase: sooner rather than later. There's a lot embedded in that simple phrase. If you kind of know intuitively that you have a big change to make, get a divorce, change your career, change something about your belief system, some fundamental thing about your belief system, think about making the change sooner rather than later. Don't have the 5 years pass. Maybe it'll still take 6 months to make the change, but you've saved 4.5 years there. So that's all by way of saying just a headline thing here. Work is a challenge for most of our clients and for ourselves. Work is a challenge. It's potentially, as I say at the bottom, our biggest drain of time and energy. It can also be the main way we live our life purposes if we can connect up work, if we can have work be life purpose work, if we can. We may not be able to. We may have to do our life purpose work on the side and have our day job pay the bills. We may have to do that to the end of time, in which case we're going to have to make sure we don't think life has cheated us. We have to be not too disappointed in that reality, if that's the reality. And we have to keep our eye on this central question that I just alluded to. Is there a big change I can make that would help me? And if there is, can I make that change sooner rather than later? Well, I've done a lot of primary work on authoritarians in the family. Had lots of people respond to a questionnaire I had out there in cyberspace called the Authoritarian Wound Questionnaire. I do a weekly blog on authoritarians in the family for the Good Men Project website, etc. And I'm saying this because we underestimate the extent to which childhood harms kids. We know it does. We know it harms lots of kids, but we have underestimated the extent to which childhood harms kids.
Go, honey.
The pundits who claim to know say that maybe 25% of the population is authoritarian by nature, and I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole deeply, just give you some headlines. If 25%, if that's an accurate statistic or guess, then almost all of us are going to have dealt with an authoritarian father, mother, uncle, brother, cleric, teacher, boss, mate, etc. And the lifelong effects of being wounded by authoritarian are severe and challenging. Now, this sounds like therapy stuff, and I don't mean it to sound like therapy stuff. It's just life stuff around understanding that our clients, we ourselves and our clients, do have a history and have been harmed, almost certainly have been harmed. And so that truth has to get factored into the way we respect how much or how little they get done. I know we get very itchy when clients don't do enough, disappointed that they don't get enough, irritated, even angry that they skip an appointment or this, that, and the other thing. I hope internally we can circle back around to this remembrance of the extent to which so many people have been harmed in a lifelong way. It's not that we can heal them, and it's not that we're doing therapy. It's just a remembrance, and maybe this remembrance helps give us that extra bit of compassion that allows us to say to a client, really glad you got that much done, and let's see what this week brings. Oh, I'm trying to now get to the end. Let me just, we are getting to the end. Okay, I'm going to skip picture of life. There is a picture of life. I'm going to skip this because I want to get to this. So the many things we've been talking about in Kirism permit you to say simple things in coaching. You wouldn't necessarily say them this way, but I want to go through these 20 because I think they'll give you a good sense of the kinds of talking points you could end up with by embracing Kirism philosophy or just getting a handle on some of these ideas. You could say to a client, maybe this week you'd like to identify and live your life purposes. Now, as I say, you wouldn't say it quite that way, but you know what I'm getting at here. You could almost provide a mini lecture to a client about the difference between seeking meaning and making meaning, and really affirm the idea that meaning can be coaxed into existence. To say it the most simply, this is the way I say it usually, let's make some meaning this week. That's the super simple way to say this whole big idea. Let's make some meaning this week. Clients get that. They suddenly get, oh, what's the seeking stuff? Yeah, let me make some meaning this week. You can invite them to create a daily practice, or not more than one to begin with, and help them understand the value of a daily practice, how they may not get their goals ever accomplished if they don't embrace the idea of a daily practice. The next idea is the idea of taking charge of our day in ways in which we've probably never done, and that's to negotiate each day around our life purposes. Have our life purpose list, and then say to ourselves, oh, I'm getting to this today, and this today, and this today, for sure, because it matters to me. The line we just went through, I'd like you to really think thoughts that serve you, or I'd like you to get the idea of thinking thoughts that serve you. I'd like you to notice when you hear a thought that isn't serving you. And maybe you'd like to report. If you like the idea of clients checking in with you on a daily basis via email, which I do, I like that as an idea and I do it. You could have them check in on a thought on them noticing one thought that didn't serve them today, and then what they said instead. That's a nice check-in. The idea of redesigning your mind. Take a step to the side. We haven't talked about this, but this is a Kirism idea of a visual way to give space so that you have time to make a strong decision or make a strong choice. And that's the idea of before choosing or before deciding, internally in the room that is your mind, taking a step to the side to give you a chance to consider. That's what that idea is. Why don't you take a step to the side and think about that a bit? I've used the word, in Kirism, I've used the word entanglements to stand for an awful lot of traditional psychology. And the simple way to say it is, are you hooked here? Are you hooked there? If something keeps coming up in coaching sessions, your client keeps bringing up this as a problem, that as a problem, the coach can say, seems like you're hooked there. What might get you unhooked? Very simple language. You can tell that I'm subsuming a ton of stuff into a very simple idea. You're hooked there. What would get you unhooked? We've said those two already. Experiences matter and circumstances matter. Personality made up of 3 parts. I think that's a powerful teaching tool. Aiming for a person. Hey, John, what personality upgrade would you like to shoot for? 13 and 14 go together. That's wondering aloud with a client in language that suits you, whether he or she has inadvertently decided that life's cheated her or that life's a disappointment. And if that's the case, what would she like to do about that? You don't want to just agree, okay, life's a cheat. No, it's not a place of agreement. That's a place of experimentation. Okay, you've been disappointed. What do you want to do about that? And then you might offer, and I do, this gestural thing of giving life a thumbs up. I mentioned 15, and that's getting a balanced view of the existence of both joy and sorrow. Straightforward idea, but often we get fixated on one side or the other. We get very smiley-faced or get very on the side of suffering, and we want to find our way into the middle somehow. I haven't talked about it in this presentation, but I do a lot of work around anxiety, and I invite clients to become anxiety masters, to understand the sources of their anxiety, and also to have a robust menu of things to try. An anxiety mastering menu for themselves. And in my book, Mastering Creative Anxiety, I think there are 20 categories of things to try. And I talk clients through things to try, whether it's simple breathing things or cognitive solutions, or there are all kinds of things to try to reduce one's experience of anxiety. Most people try to white knuckle anxiety. They just bear it. They don't have go-to strategies. They kind of in the back of their mind know they would love go-to strategies, but they don't actually have them. And you have the opportunity, this is not therapy, this is just everyday living. You have the opportunity to say, you know, what would you like to try to be calmer day in and day out? What do you think might work? And maybe have some suggestions at the ready if you're a suggesting kind of coach. I also invite people to learn lots more about how energy manifests in their lives, how to increase energy, both physical energy and mental energy, which are different kinds of energy. There's lots to be said about energy. Wish we could spend, you know, time on 17. 18, 19, and 20 all go together. They all amount to the same thing, and that is, here you are, you matter, you must don the mantle of meaning maker, you must take charge of your life, you must be the hero of your own story. You are obliged to create your life. Your life is your project, and you're only going to make yourself proud if you live it well. That feels like a pretty darn decent place to stop, which can be pre-ordered daily practice. I think that book you might find really valuable. As I say, we all know that daily practice is a great idea, but I don't think that coaches understand the extent to which it's a great idea. So, Dawn, I don't know if you have a last thing to do, but I'm going to thank everyone for your kind attention, and I hope that Kirism interests you and that you go learn more about it. I've handed it to you, Dawn. Well, I am not hearing Dawn, so I will just say goodbye and thank you so much. If you would like to be in touch with me, my email address is ericmaisel@hotmail.com. I'm happy to chat with you about anything. Come visit me at ericmaisel.com and come drop me a note if you feel like doing that. Thank you. Au revoir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
You're very welcome.
Great pen. Oh. Coming! Hello, come on in. Come on in.
Refrigerator that needs
Well,
some attention.